Hello and welcome to the Very Audible Stories. In today's videos, it would be a stories about a hidden kindness coming from a mafia bosses whom everyone feared. If you like these videos, please share your thoughts on the comment sections and subscribe to the channel to receive notifications about new videos. Thank you.
Rain lashed against the pavement as a 6-year-old girl tore through the alley, her tiny lungs burning. Behind her, heavy footsteps echoed in the dark. She didn't look back. She just ran, crashing straight into the tailored suit of Chicago's most ruthless underboss, screaming 3 words that changed everything. Dominic Rossi was not a man who believed in coincidence. In his world, a sudden change in the wind usually meant someone was standing on a rooftop with a rifle. As the head of the Rossi syndicate, he controlled the port authorities, 3 local unions, and half the politicians operating out of Cook County. He was a man insulated by wealth, violence, and a carefully curated reputation for absolute ruthlessness. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dominic had just stepped out of the private side entrance of Ricardo's, a high-end steakhouse on Wabash Avenue. The Chicago rain was coming down in sheets, washing the grime off the neon-lit streets. His right-hand man, Leo, was already holding an umbrella over him, while his driver waited by the idling black SUV. Dominic was halfway to the car when a small, violent force slammed into his legs. He didn't flinch, but his hand instinctively dropped toward his waistline. Leo was already moving, his own hand inside his jacket. But it wasn't an assassin. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her blonde hair was matted to her forehead with rain and mud. She wore a thin, torn pink jacket that was entirely inadequate for the biting November chill, and she was clutching a filthy stuffed rabbit with a missing ear. She was shaking so violently that Dominic could feel the tremors radiating through his wool brioni trousers. Before Dominic could speak, a man burst out of the alleyway. He was out of breath, his face flushed red. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting leather jacket and smelled faintly of stale beer and desperation. I'm so sorry, sir," the man panted, wiping the rain from his face as he jogged toward them. He forced a strained, apologetic laugh. "Kids, right? 1 minute they're fine, the next they're throwing a tantrum because you won't buy them ice cream in a thunderstorm. Come here, Lily. Stop bothering the nice gentleman." The man reached out to grab the girl's arm. Lily let out a sound that Dominic would never forget. It wasn't a cry of defiance. It was a pure, primal shriek of visceral terror. She dug her tiny fingers into the fabric of Dominic's suit, burying her face against his leg. "He's not my dad," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Please, he's not my dad." The man's face hardened for a fraction of a second before the fake, apologetic smile returned. "Lily, sweetheart, stop making up stories. You're embarrassing me. Sir, I really apologize. She's been watching too much TV. Come on, sweetie, your mother is waiting at home." Leo took a step forward, blocking the man's path. "The boss hasn't told you to move yet." Dominic looked down at the girl, then back up at the man. Dominic made his living reading people. He lived and breathed the subtle tales of liars, thieves, and murderers. The man standing in front of him wasn't a frustrated father. He was a cornered animal. "What's your name?" Dominic asked, his voice low, smooth, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Greg." "Greg Miller," the man stammered, his eyes darting to Leo, then back to the idling SUV. "Look, buddy, I don't want any trouble. I just want my daughter." "She says you're not her father," Dominic stated quietly. "She's playing a game." Greg's voice rose, a jagged edge of panic bleeding through. "Are you crazy? You're going to take a 6-year-old's word over mine? Hand her over before I call the cops." It was the wrong thing to say. Dominic Rossi practically owned the local precinct. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of Dominic's mouth. "Call them," Dominic whispered. Greg froze. The rain continued to pour, soaking them all, but the alley suddenly felt suffocatingly quiet. Dominic tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto Greg. "Call the police, Greg Miller. Let's stand here in the rain and wait for them. Let's run your DNA against hers. Let's see what's in your pockets." Let's see what they find in the trunk of the car you undoubtedly have parked 3 blocks away in the shadows. Greg swallowed hard. His eyes flicked to the bulge beneath Leo's tailored jacket. He realized, with sudden, crushing clarity, that he hadn't just run into a rich businessman. He had run into a predator far higher on the food chain than he could ever comprehend. "Take a walk, Greg," Dominic said softly. "While you still have legs to walk on." Greg backed up slowly, his hands raised in surrender. "You're making a mistake, man. You don't know whose toes you're stepping on." "I rarely care," Dominic replied. Greg turned and bolted down the wet pavement, disappearing into the neon-lit fog. Dominic looked down. The little girl was still clutching his leg, her knuckles white. Slowly, Dominic knelt, the damp pavement ruining his expensive suit. He gently pried her hands away from his leg and took off his own suit jacket, wrapping it around her small, trembling shoulders. "He's gone, little bird," Dominic said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Are you hurt?" Lily shook her head, her large blue eyes staring up at him in awe. "What did you say your name was?" Dominic asked. "Lily," she whispered. "All right, Lily," Dominic said, standing up and scooping her effortlessly into his arms. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Dominic's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a fortress disguised as a luxury apartment, accessible only by a private elevator that required biometric scans. Within an hour, Lily was clean. Maria, Dominic's fiercely loyal housekeeper, had drawn her a warm bath, dressed her in an oversized t-shirt, and set a bowl of homemade chicken soup in front of her at the massive marble kitchen island. Dominic sat across from her, a glass of amber scotch in his hand, watching her eat. He was a man who dealt in extortion, hostile takeovers, and organized violence. Taking in a stray child was a massive liability. But there was something about the girl's eyes, a sharp, piercing blue that gnawed at the back of his mind. They were achingly familiar. Leo walked into the kitchen, his face grim. He tossed a damp leather wallet onto the counter. "My guys caught up with Greg Miller about 6 blocks away," Leo said, keeping his voice low so as not to spook the girl. "He didn't put up much of a fight. He's currently secured in the basement of the meat packing plant." "Who is he?" Dominic asked, taking a sip of his scotch. "Nobody," Leo replied, swiping through a tablet. "A bottom feeder, petty theft, gambling debts, a few possession charges. He owes about 80 grand to the local sports books. But here's the kicker, Dom. He works as a low-level runner for the Moretti family." Dominic's jaw tightened. The Moretti family was a rival faction, currently locked in a tense, fragile truce with Dominic's syndicate over the distribution lines in the South Side. If the Morettis were using degenerate gamblers to snatch kids off the street, something was terribly wrong. Why would the Morettis want her? Dominic muttered. He turned his attention back to the little girl. She had finished her soup and was stifling a yawn, the sheer exhaustion of the night finally catching up to her. "Lily," Dominic called softly. She looked up. "Can you tell me your last name? I need to find your mom." Lily rubbed her eyes. "Jenkins. I'm Lily Jenkins." Dominic stopped breathing. The glass of scotch in his hand hovered inches from his mouth. "Jenkins. What is your mother's name, Lily?" Dominic asked, his voice suddenly hollow. "Sarah," Lily said simply. "Sarah Jenkins." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Dominic set the glass down before he dropped it. 8 years ago, before he had inherited the bloody throne of the Rossi family, Dominic had lived a different life. He had spent a summer in exile in Miami, lying low. That was where he met Sarah. She was a brilliant, fiery accountant with piercing blue eyes, the exact same eyes now staring back at him from across the kitchen island. They had fallen in love. It was fast, reckless, and entirely doomed. When Dominic's father was murdered, Dominic was called back to Chicago to take over the family. He knew the life he was entering. He knew his enemies would use anyone he loved against him. To protect Sarah, he broke her heart. He left in the middle of the night without a word, entirely erasing himself from her life, breaking his own heart in the process to keep her safe. He hadn't seen her in 7 years. Lily was 6. Dominic's gaze drifted from the little girl to Leo, who had stopped typing on his tablet and was watching Dominic with cautious eyes. Leo had been there back then. He knew what Sarah meant to his boss. Leo, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, turning into a deadly rasp. Find Sarah Jenkins. Use every resource we have. Tap the local cameras, ping cell towers, bribe the CPD dispatchers. I want to know where she is, and I want to know why a Moretti rat grabbed her daughter. On it, Leo said, already walking toward the door. Dominic stood up and walked over to Lily. She was nearly asleep at the counter. He gently picked her up, carrying her to one of the guest bedrooms. He laid her down on the plush mattress and pulled the duvet over her. "Are you going to find my mommy?" Lily murmured, her eyes half closed. "I'm going to find her," Dominic promised, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her forehead. "No one is going to hurt you or her ever again." Once Lily was asleep, Dominic walked out into the living room. The storm was still raging outside, lightning flashing across the Chicago skyline. His phone buzzed. It was Leo. "Boss," Leo said, his voice tight. "We found her. Or, at least we found where she was working. Sarah Jenkins has been operating under the radar, doing the books for a dummy corporation out in the West Loop. But Dom, that corporation is a front. It belongs to Vincent Moretti." Dominic's blood ran cold. Sarah, the woman he had abandoned to keep her away from the mob, had somehow ended up working for his greatest enemy. "There's more," Leo continued. Greg Miller started talking. The Morettis didn't just want the kid for ransom. Sarah found something in the ledgers. She found out Vincent Moretti has been skimming from the New York Commission. She downloaded the files onto an encrypted drive. Moretti sent Greg to snatch the daughter to force Sarah into a trade. "Where is the trade supposed to happen?" Dominic demanded, pacing the length of the penthouse floor. "Tomorrow night, the abandoned rail yards on the south side." "Gather the crew," Dominic ordered, his eyes reflecting the lightning from the storm outside. "Heavy artillery. Silence the phones." "Dom, if we hit the Morettis, it's all-out war. The truce will be broken." "I don't give a damn about the truce," Dominic snarled, the civilized veneer of the businessman entirely stripped away, leaving only the ruthless Mafia boss underneath. "They touched what is mine. Let them burn." The basement of the Chicago meatpacking plant smelled of sawdust, bleach, and old fear. It was a sterile, industrial setting, far removed from the velvet and marble of Dominic's penthouse, yet this was the foundation upon which his empire was built. In the center of the room, strapped to a steel chair under the harsh glare of a single bulb, sat Greg Miller. He was no longer the confident, smug kidnapper. He was sweating profusely, his leather jacket discarded, his cheap shirt stained with the rain and dust of his escape. Dominic stood just outside the circle of light, a shadow observing a panicked animal. Leo leaned against a support beam, meticulously cleaning his fingernails with a small, sharp knife. "Greg," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm, conversational even. He stepped into the light. "We need to talk about your employers." Greg gulped, his eyes bulging. "I told you, man. I work for Moretti. Low level. I just take orders. I didn't know the kid was important to you. I swear." "The kid isn't important to me," Dominic lied easily. "Her mother is. You were going to use the daughter to blackmail the mother into handing over data that proves Vincent Moretti is skimming from New York." Greg stopped breathing. "That information was supposed to be restricted to the family's inner circle. How do you know that?" "I own the city, Greg. When a rat sneezes in the West Loop, I hear it on the south side. Now, here is how this is going to go. You are going to tell me exactly what the plan was for Sarah after she handed over the drive." Greg hesitated. The unspoken code of silence struggled against his primal fear for his own life. Dominic nodded to Leo. Leo moved with casual, horrifying efficiency. He didn't stab Greg. He simply grabbed Greg's left index finger and applied pressure, bending it backward slowly. The crack of bone was a loud, sickening sound that echoed in the concrete room. Greg shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure agony. Okay, stop, please." After she gave us the drive, Greg sobbed, tears and snot streaming down his face. "We were supposed to kill her. And the kid, Vincent said no loose ends. He was going to stage it like a carjacking gone wrong in a bad neighborhood." Dominic's expression didn't change. It became smoother, colder, like granite. If he had shown anger, Greg might have had hope, but this absolute void of emotion was terrifying. "I was just a runner, man. I didn't make the call," Greg pleaded. Dominic nodded. He turned to Leo. "Take him outside, put a bullet in his head and drop him in the lake. The Morettis are cleaning house. We should do the same." As Leo unstrapped the screaming, blubbering man, Dominic's phone hummed in his pocket. He walked out of the torture room into the slightly less oppressive air of the plant's main floor. It was a message from a trusted DNA diagnostic lab he used for private inquiries. Leo came out a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the look on Dominic's face as he stared at his phone. It was the face of a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps seen his entire future crash into his present. Dominic showed the phone screen to Leo. On it was the lab report comparing the genetic samples taken from Lily, a stray hair on the stuffed rabbit, and a glass Dominic had used earlier that night. Result: positive match. Probability of paternity: 99.99%. Lily was his. Sarah hadn't just gone into hiding 8 years ago. She had gone into hiding carrying his child. She had faced motherhood alone, in fear, to protect that little girl from him. And in a twist of cruel fate, the life she feared had found them anyway, dragged them both into the center of a war Dominic had tried to keep them away from. Dominic pocketed the phone. The shock was replaced by a rage so profound it nearly choked him. Vincent Moretti had planned to kill his daughter. "Call everyone," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that was far scarier than a shout. "Not just the Southside crew. Pull in the runners from Gary. I want the docks locked down. I want Rico and his specialists on the rooftops. No silence. No diplomacy. We go in heavy." "We need a strategy for Sarah, Dom," Leo said, his voice professional but tinged with concern. "The exchange is at the rail yard at midnight. The Morettis will expect a trade." Dominic shook his head. "Sarah isn't going anywhere near that rail yard. If they see her and realize they can't kill her easily, they will execute the alternate plan. No, we intercept Sarah. I get her to safety. You take the crew to the rail yard." "What do I do with the Morettis?" Dominic looked at his friend. "Erase them. Let the commission know that Chicago is under new management." The abandoned rail yards on the south side was a graveyard of rusty boxcars and overgrown tracks, a bleak testament to the city's vanishing industrial past. It was a place where people came to hide or to be buried. At 11:45 p.m., 3 black SUVs arrived at the main gate. From one of them, Sarah Jenkins stepped out. She looked pale and exhausted, her blue eyes, Dominic's eyes, rimmed with red from crying. She was clutching a small, silver-encrypted drive in her trembling hand. She was alone, just as the Morettis had instructed. Before she could take another step toward the designated meeting point, another black vehicle, Dominic's SUV, screeched to a halt, blocking her path. Sarah frozen in terror, thinking this was the ambush. The driver's side door opened, and a man she hadn't seen in 8 years stepped out. Dominic looked older, more dangerous, but those eyes, she would know them anywhere. "Dominic?" she whispered, her voice failing. "Get in the car, Sarah," he said, his voice rough. "No, they have Lily. They told me if I don't give them the drive, they'll—" "I have Lily," Dominic interrupted, his voice firm. "She is at my place, clean, fed, and safe." Sarah looked at him, disbelief battling hope on her face. You have her?" "Yes," Dominic said. "I ran into her on Wabash earlier tonight. The Moretti's runner, Greg, tried to grab her. She's safe, Sarah." Sarah's knees buckled. She crumpled onto the wet gravel, a sob of visceral relief tearing from her throat. 8 years of hiding, 24 hours of pure, unadulterated terror, and now, this man, the source of both her happiness and her darkest nightmares, was standing here telling her the nightmare was over. Dominic moved, collapsing onto the gravel beside her. He didn't care about his suit or his image. He just wanted to comfort her. He pulled her into his arms, and she held on to him, sobbing against his chest, just as their daughter had earlier that night. "You left," she whispered, against his jacket. "Why did you leave us?" "To keep you safe," Dominic said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't recognize. "This life, It's a virus, Sarah. It kills everything it touches. I thought if I erased myself, you would have a normal life. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Suddenly, a massive flash of white light illuminated the night sky, followed a second later by the thunderous boom of an explosion. It came from the depth of the rail yard, near the meeting point. Leo was executing the plan. The Morettis weren't getting a trade. They were getting obliterated. Dominic pulled Sarah to her feet. "We have to go. My people are handling Moretti. We need to get you back to Lily." The reunion in the penthouse was one that even the most hardened member of Dominic's crew would never forget. When Sarah walked into the kitchen, Lily, who had been coloring at the island under Maria's watchful eye, dropped her crayon. "Mommy!" Lily shrieked, running across the massive room. Sarah met her halfway, sweeping her daughter into her arms, burying her face in the girl's neck. The sound of their shared tears was raw and beautiful. Dominic stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the rain-slicked city. The Moretti family was effectively wiped out. The power dynamic in Chicago had shifted completely. He knew the commission in New York would demand answers, would likely call him to account, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about the throne. He only cared about the woman and child in his living room. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, walking over to stand beside him, Lily holding onto her hand. Dominic looked at them. "Whatever you want. If you want to take Lily and vanish, I will set you up anywhere in the world. New names, new lives. You will be protected by a firewall you cannot even imagine. You will never have to see me again." "And if we want to stay?" Sarah asked softly, her blue eyes meeting his. 8 years ago, she had fallen in love with a charming exile. Now, she was looking at a mafia boss who had just ordered a massacre to save her daughter. She saw the ruthlessness, but she also saw the love he felt for her, a love that had never faded. She knew there was no going back to normal. The life had found her. The only real protection she had was him. "If you stay," Dominic said, "I will burn this city down if I have to keep you safe. No one will ever touch either of you again." Sarah took a step closer, resting her hand lightly on his forearm. "We're not running anymore, Dominic." The blood on the rail yards was washed away by the relentless Chicago rain, burying the Moretti regime along with Dominic's past. A fragile truce with New York was secured, built on the absolute fear of the new Rossi patriarch. Dominic, once a man driven solely by power and legacy, had found a new, more dangerous priority. Chicago had a new king, but for the first time, he wasn't ruling alone.